Aiming is the most important mechanic in the game, and today we're going to be going over tips from 20 years of esports to learn how to do it properly. First up, aiming is all about being able to control your mouse effectively and consistently by developing a very clear body to mouse to crosshair feel. We do this with three parts of the body: the wrist and fingers, the forearm, and the rest of the arm and our posture. The fingers are mainly used for micro adjustments where we ever so slightly adjust our crosshair before shooting, and we do this after we move the rest of our body. This is because our fingers have the lowest range of motion. That just means you can't move far with them compared to the rest of your body. Our wrist is a bit more useful though. The wrist can be used for smaller flicks and little adjustments, but most importantly, for the majority of scenarios, most of the actual aiming happens in the wrist. Just think about it. You never really have to flick your forearm around when you finish an edit on someone to shoot them because your crosshair is always near the enemy, so you'll only need to use your wrist to hit a 200 instead of a 30. This makes getting used to your wrist's range of motion and practicing controlling your mouse with your wrist very important in order to hit more shots. Speaking of wrist aiming, you should never be tensing your wrist. This is because if you could practice keeping a relaxed wrist and forearm while playing, your range of motion and accuracy will improve, and by far most importantly, you'll be at a significantly lower risk to injuries than people who do tense their wrist, or any other part of their body for that matter. The overall posture and positioning of your body is not really used for actual aiming, but it still can have a large effect on your aim if you mess it up. This is one of the most common issues with people's aim and it just being inconsistent. Ever felt like your aim is just amazing one day and you're hitting all your shots, and then the next day you just can't hit a shot to save your life? This could be why. I'll link a few videos in the description to watch after this one on how to set up your desk with the correct posture and ergonomics, and from there just mark out or memorize exactly where and how you should sit and make sure it's consistent every time you play so you can properly improve your aim, because if you're not sitting correctly, you'll get really big health issues later down the line, and if you don't sit consistently, your aim won't be reliable or be able to be improved. The forearm is possibly the most important part of your body when it comes to aiming. This is what we use for our largest swiping motions and to aim when enemies are really close to us, like if you're just in the same box. But you also use your forearm just to look around and do lots of major motions that get us through the game that people just take for granted. These can include navigating through buildings, just looking around when you're out in the open, or spinning around when you get shot at. The forearm is a really good place for me to introduce the idea of pivot points. Pivot points are simply points on your body that can have a particular range of motion. For example, where your forearm meets the table is a pivot point and determines the range of motion that you can get out of your forearm. This makes it extremely important for you to position your arm consistently when you sit down to play, because otherwise all of your pivot points will be off and your aim will become worse on the day, inconsistent in the long run, and probably worst of all, nearly impossible to improve properly when aim training. To position consistently, just first make sure that all of your gear is set up correctly like we talked about before. You might even need to set markings of where to position your chair, arms, and body when you sit down. It's also important to make sure that you have the same grip every time you use the mouse as well. There are three main types of mouse grip: claw, palm, and fingertip. It doesn't matter so much which grip you use, but just make sure to try them all out and stick to the same one every time you play once you make a decision. Make sure to remember that the grip that you are first comfortable with might not always be the best grip for you, and so you do need to actually give them all a good go. Waggling, a term used in golf which involves a player finely jiggling around their body once they grip the club to perfect their position, can be very useful here. For the same reason golfers do it, you should waggle your hands into the locked position of your choice every time. This will ensure that you have the exact same body to mouse feel every time you play, and the only other part missing is your mouse to crosshair feel, which is dedicated by your sensitivity. Sensitivity is a highly debated topic in the Fortnite scene and is one of the most influential factors on your aim. As opposed to other shooters like Valorant or CS, Fortnite has a much larger range of shooting distances. Because of building and editing, close range aiming gets physically as close as possible, and because the game is a battle royale on a big map, long range aiming can get to the point where it just looks like you're shooting at a ball of blackish pixels. So the challenge then becomes finding a sensitivity to suit both. We'll get to it, but there are some important terms we need to discuss around sensitivity. DPI stands for dots per inch, or you can say pixels per inch if it's easier to think of that way. DPI is simply a measurement of how many pixels your cursor moves for every inch in real life you move your mouse. Really, there's no best DPI, but if you go too low, you can experience pixel skipping and inconsistencies, and you won't be able to control the mouse that well. Polling rate is simply the rate at which your mouse reports its position to the computer. Most modern mice now are set to to 1,000, and that's pretty good because the lower you go, the more inconsistent and less smooth your aim will become because there's a higher, more varied delay between you moving your mouse and the signal going to your computer. For example, if you move your mouse on a 1000 Hz polling rate, which means your mouse's position is being reported to your computer every millisecond, it can be anywhere from 0 to 1 milliseconds before your computer registers it, making for smooth and very consistent movement because there can only be up to a 1 millisecond difference in times. Whereas if you have a 100 Hz polling rate, the signal can get to your computer anywhere from 0 to 10 milliseconds after you move your mouse. This makes for noticeably worse gameplay and an overall poor performance in aim. Lastly, EDPI stands for effective dots per inch, and it's basically a method of figuring out what sensitivity you actually play on. To find your EDPI, you multiply your in-game sense by your DPI. For example, if my sensitivity is 10% and my DPI is 400, my EDPI is 40. However, if my in-game sense is 5% and my DPI is 800, my EDPI is still 40. This makes it useful for comparing actual sensitivities across a game. Now, there's no certain best sensitivity, but a good recommendation for a starting point is to find the space on your mousepad that you're comfortable using and set that distance to a 360. Before we end off this part on sensitivity, we need to address some common misconceptions that high sense players use only their wrist to aim and that low sense players use their arm. While it's understandable why people think that way, it's just plain wrong because good players use a combination of all their body parts in order to aim. The only thing that sensitivity changes is the ratio of usage. High sense players will use more wrist and low sense players tend to use less. From there, it's basically up to you to choose your sense, but trying the PSA method is probably one of the best ways to find your sense, and just make sure that you have a sense that allows you to take advantage of all your different body parts and ranges of motion that we talked about earlier. After you've done all of that, it's time to start training your aim. This is a crucial step to developing that body to mouse to crosshair feel that will improve your aim. There are 3 main ways to do this within Fortnite, so let's take a look at each of them. First up, we have third-party aim trainers out of the game like Kovacs or AimLab. There are a lot of misconceptions about aim trainers that go through the community, so we gotta get through some of them. They will not teach you dodging patterns that can help you hit shots, and they won't teach you the game sense associated with aiming like recoil patterns, peaks, and weapon choice. But they're by far the best when it comes to developing better mouse feeling and improving raw aiming ability. Raw aiming ability, or mouse control, is just your ability to control the mouse accurately and can be used in any game or sense. So in terms of raw aiming ability, they're just unmatched, and that's why you need to play them. The next method of improving your aim is aim duels. If you don't know, in aim duels, you and your opponent grab a gun and jump into a box with 2k, 5k, or 10k HP and just aim. I can't go over all of the maps now, but the 1x1 cone flick and react scenarios and the classic aim duels are probably the best because they involve real game environments, weapons, and movements. These are amazing for improving not only a bit of raw aim, but are also better than third-party aim trainers for your in-game aim because the scenarios that you play in involve real game environments, weapons, and movements. Aim duels are especially good for improving your in-box shotgun and tracking. Before we get into the last method of improving your aim, we need to go over the crucial concept that is mixed aim practice. Many people who practice their aim often still struggle to aim in actual game scenarios. This is because after training your aim for a while, your brain basically develops and goes into an aiming only mode when you aim train in order to focus on your aim. It's pretty genius when you think about it, but it actually hinders our aim practice because we can't use it in real games. This means that when you get into a real game scenario and you're forced to aim, you just can't do it because you've only practiced isolated aim practice in that aiming mode. This is where mixed aim practice comes in. Mixed aim practice is basically the idea that you have to train your aim while having to use your other mechanics. The other mechanics aren't the focus even though you are using them, but they just need to be there in the scenario while you train your aim. Aim duels partly do this in that you're forced to focus on your movement in order to succeed, and third-party aim trainers certainly don't do this at all because the only mechanic is aim and mostly you're standing still. One good way to do this is just to hop into any 1v1 or even some arena and just play out the game with a constant focus on aim. This will get your brain's aim mode and just playing normally combined, and your aiming skills will transfer over much better into actual games. None of the methods you can use to do that compare to the last aim training method in this video, Panville's 200 pump box fight map. This map is basically your normal Total Wars box fight FFA type map, except for one thing: you can only kill people by hitting a 200. In this map, you are forced to use and get to practice your other mechanics, but there's an emphasis on aim because you need to hit a 200 to succeed. This makes the map an amazing way to get in your mixed aim practice and actually can make for a pretty efficient warm-up if you're short on time. It's not only amazing for improving your aim, but it's also about the only map that builds the very important skill of trigger discipline, which is basically the idea of knowing when and when not to shoot. The main idea is that it's much better to wait and line up a max damage shot that you're guaranteed to hit than rushing and missing. The map helps with this because you're forced to learn to line up and wait to shoot to succeed, because you can only kill someone with a 200 that takes time to line up.